morning, Year 5s. It's Monday, it's foggy, and it is time to have a look at our reading. So, you'll recognise this text. We've had this text a couple of times for different reading metamates, different skills. So just a reminder, your maths is all down here, so don't need to worry about that for this video. As normal, your work's on here. If you right-click it and open a new tab, it will come up at the top. You just need to click on the document, obviously. So, it's the Anglo Saxon one. We've had a look at this a few times, but with different questions. So, have a little skim read, familiarise yourself, but you should start remembering, oh yes, it's about when they came to England, the houses, their gods, and how they eventually became no more. So, what impression do you get of the Anglo Saxon people? Remember, impression means what gut instinct do you get from them? Were they kind? Were they fierce? What sort of people were they like? So your impression is what you think of that person or group of people. Now on the first line it says they're a group of farmer warriors, made up of tribes, fierce people, but normally fighting each other. They had a strong warrior. I get the impression that most Saxons were peaceful farming people, but they did have, you know, a sense of defending themselves, and they did fight. So my impression would be that many Anglo-Saxons were peaceful farmers, but they had fights and warriors within them to protect their lands. I think quite a tricky first question there. Maybe that shouldn't be a white question. Was Christianity forced onto the Anglo-Saxons? Well, skim reading, we know the gods here, down here. So, many of today's Christian traditions come from Anglo-Saxons, but they weren't always Christian. When they first came over, they were pagans. They were prey to the pagan gods. It wasn't until the Pope in Rome sent over a missionary monk called Augustine, became Christians. They convinced the Anglo-Saxons to convert to Christianity, and slowly the rest of the country followed. So, the wording of this text says that they were convinced. So from the text, you've kind of got to say, no, they weren't forced. They were shown the ways of Christianity, and it slowly spread across the country. Whether that means they were convinced or that it was forced upon them, they probably need more evidence that's not in this text. But from the text, no, they weren't forced. They were convinced, and it was slowly spread across the country. What does open plan living tell you about an Anglo-Saxon family life? We don't really need to look at the text for that one. The information's in there. Open plan living, you might want to have a little look, because it's about the housing, isn't it, and how they lived. So the open plan living, they all lived in one room. They all lived, ate, slept, socialised together like an open plan living. So what does that tell you about their lives? Well, clearly family was very important, wasn't it? Staying together, cooking together, sleeping together, socialising together, spending as much time as possible in a communal place. So family was very important, and tribes are clearly very important. You know, if you went to somebody's house, you were in their entire house. So I think that tells you that family life, it was key. It was really, really important. Do you think you would be safe travelling through Anglo-Saxon Britain, and why? Now this is an interesting one. I would say yes, because, like we've just said, they're farmer warriors. And the only time they fought, really, was when they were fighting each other, as in tribes across the country. So you'd have big sections of the country that were ruled by, like, one tribe. So if you were travelling from village to village, you'd be quite safe. I think you'd be they'd wonder who you are and that. But in terms of the information, they were only really fighting each other. So you've kind of got to say, well, yes, maybe it would be quite safe. Maybe depending on which tribe you're from. Would you say the Anglo-Saxons, were invaders? Now, if you go down here, it says they first tried invading in the 4th century, but the Roman army was there. Years later, the Romans left Britain. The Anglo-Saxons seized their chance. They left their homes and sailed over in boats. This was because there were floodwaters back home, which made it impossible to farm. If you looked at that very quickly, you'd say yes, they were invaders. But if you read down to the bottom here, they actually left because their home wasn't good enough anymore. They couldn't farm, so they couldn't survive. Technically, that's kind of like a refugee, isn't it? You're fleeing because of fear of not being able to live and survive. So, I personally, from this text, it wouldn't give me the impression that they were invaders. They tried to, but then when they came over, there was nobody invading. The Romans had left. So, an interesting question, which I think you could argue that were kind of refugee kind of settlers. They just needed new land. It wasn't like they stayed over where they were and invaded another country. They found a new place to settle because they couldn't live where they did anymore. So an interesting one there. Augustine was a missionary sent by the Pope. What do you think this means? We've seen that word. It's down here. Sent over a missionary, a monk called Augustine, to England so that the Anglo Saxons became Christian. That's kind of all you've got there. Augustine convinced the Anglo Saxons. Well, we can guess that a missionary is some sort of religious person to spread the word of their religion, maybe. Is missionary, a monk called Augustine who went to convince the Anglo Saxons to be Christian. So maybe a missionary is somebody, a religious person who tries to spread their religion to other countries. I think that's a hit and miss one today. I think there's parts of that are quite easy and parts of that can be quite tricky. Okay, but remember, it's Dr. Deduction, so we've got to find the facts and the answers, the evidence in the text. But well done with that, fantastic.